Welcome to the Love the Star podcast. I'm Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider for 105 through the Fan in Dallas, joined as always by former NFL scout. He is a Super Bowl winner, Brian Broaddus. He is now the co-host of the G-Bag Nation, 2 to 7 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday on 105 through the Fan in Dallas. He is also the pre- and post-game co-host on the Dallas Cowboys radio network, which you can hear him doing the day that this airs here. We're recording this Friday night, but Saturday when this airs, we've got a game against the Las Vegas Raiders coming up for the Dallas Cowboys, and you'll hear Brian on that. Brian Broaddus, how are you? How is Oxnard? Are you itching to stay out there another 2-3 weeks?
Oh man, Bobby, if they let me stay another month and watch practice, you know how much I love that. But yeah, no, it's good. We're getting to the end. We've got the preseason game, as you're talking about, against the Raiders that we're looking forward to. I know we're going to chop that thing up and then, and break it down. And we've got a few more days, a couple more practices, and then we all head back to Dallas. So it's been a really, really good camp so far. The amount of work that they're able to get in these conditions is ideal. The weather, you don't have to survive the practice. You just have to practice. When it's 75 degrees or 76 degrees and you're practicing and you're going out there and you're going at it. There's some teams that have had to deal with heat, humidity, and it's, that could be a little bit of a problem. When you're trying to survive a practice instead of practicing, that you're not getting any better that way. And it's hard not to get better. They've had a couple of different opportunities. Here they are going to play 2 preseason games, and they're going to work twice against the Rams. That's some pretty good work for this. And then also, like Mike McCarthy likes to talk about, work against each other, and that's been very positive. So I would have to say the camp has been a big success from that aspect.
All right, so let's. There's been a lot that's happened since the last time that we talked. So before we roll into kind of previewing what we have coming up against the Raiders, I want to just kind of do a quick recap, a quick capsule. We're going to kind of just hit a few bullet points, get your thoughts on them, kick them around a little bit. So let's start off with some of the offensive line changes. Chuma Edoga, we knew he was hurt in the game the other day, but we didn't know to what extent. We find out this week it's a significant toe injury, which I heard was a fracture or a break of some sort. He's going to be out for several weeks. Tyler Guyton steps in, gets left tackle. Middle of this week, Mike McCarthy announces that Cooper Beebe is going to start getting some of the first team reps at center. I believe the Wednesday practice he got them, and then Thursday it was more Brock Hoffman. So starting to see a little bit of a competition there. Brian, as we look at things now, just kind of talk to us about how you think the rookies have reacted out there at camp this week, Guyton and Beebe, with the reps that they've gotten. And do you feel like this is a legitimate competition that Beebe's being allowed to engage in now with Brock Hoffman, or do you think it's more something where Hoffman's probably still got this under control? They're just trying to work him in a little bit more.
I felt like, though, Bobby, that when McCarthy had made the announcement or the proclamation that Beebe has earned more snaps and to work with the ones, I saw that as a really positive sign. I don't think he did poorly at all in the scrimmage against the Rams. I'll say this, though. Overall, the offense wasn't good enough against the Rams, but neither was the Rams offense against the Cowboys defense. Defense won the day. But
right.
But to talk about the 2 rookie linemen, with Beebe, there's, he's not your prototypical looking NFL lineman. I was surprised how kind of squatty and stumpy and short-armed he looks.
He is.
But he's very effective. He's got really good balance. He moves well. He's a powerful guy. He can dry block pretty well. He gets his hands inside. A lot of good things about him. He's just not a very long or tall guy. Whereas on the other side, you get, with Guyton and I was hearing some before we came on. I was worried that Guyton, they're kind of a little bit light at offensive tackle and I was worried about Guyton. Is he going to get work because now he's the starter at left tackle? Well, I was told he is going to get work in the game, and we'll see again about the pitch count stuff. I think it wasn't as many. It was a handful of plays against the Rams. Maybe it will go a little bit longer this time around. But yeah, the two young offensive linemen, they're holding their own, and going against Verse the other day, I thought was a really good experience for Guyton. He's gone against Parsons, which is no match. I mean, the Rams had no answer, trying to block him.
The rest of the league doesn't have an answer either.
I mean, it's Parsons. He goes against Tank. He goes, Nealon. These guys, they'll tax you. They'll tax you on the rush. I mean, Nealon is learning, but they'll tax you on this rush. And Verse found a way to break him down. And I think what happened with Guyton is he hasn't practiced a lot. Then he got in that scrimmage or the work with the Rams, and they were going play after play after play after play, and his conditioning probably wasn't great. And there were a couple times where instead of, I think, where Duke is our line coach, our buddy
Duke Manyweather,
Duke Manyweather would have probably said, "Okay, man, hey, punch here, punch here, punch here, hands here, hands." Duke would have coached him up a little more to probably, not try and place your hands, but don't just put your hands up there so they could be swatted away. I thought that was a really good learning experience, the way that Verse played him, slapping his hands and trying to move him a little bit. Verse is a tall, long, rangy. I mean, everything we saw of him at Florida State, they might have stole the guy here. They really might have. I mean, he's really, really good live.
Yeah.
But this line, like I say, Awesome Richards is another guy that's getting a lot of work as a young guy. We see TJ Bass. These guys they all need this work. The whole line needs work. And this might be the weekend, and I've said it on 105.3 The Fan on our show in the G-Bag Nation in Krusty's Corner, that I felt like you're not going to see Trey Lance throw the ball 40 times this game. They've got all these running backs that are healthy. You need to figure out who can help you and who can't help you. You need to figure that out. And I think it starts against the Raiders with a little bit more of a commitment to try and establish a little bit more of the run. You don't want to get a bunch of 3-and-outs and put the defense in some harm's way, but maybe see what you have with some of these backs and then get a better understanding of what you need to do, not only this week against the Raiders, but next week against the Chargers. And then when you have to make those final cuts, you will say, okay, we need another back in here, or, hey, we're going to be just fine. I think you could tell a lot through practices, but I think you could also tell a lot through these preseason games with the guys that are in question.
Another item here, you mentioned we had the joint practice this week. That was the third time they had seen each other in about a week, between two joint practices and a game. This one a little chippier, and we had the viral moment of Albert Huggins pushing the Rams intern there, who I heard some commentary nationally from one individual. I won't say who, but her name rhymes with Maggie Gray. Maggie Gray had said that she thought this was the fault of the intern. You got to have your head on a swivel and be able to get out of the way. And it's like, well, no, that's literally where he's supposed to be standing, kind of simulating like quarterback depth and everything else. But okay, fine, whatever. But Albert Huggins, to me, the problem was the extension. So he extended his arms and he didn't come back around. He did exactly that on purpose. But Brian, your thoughts on the Huggins incident and just in general with the chippier practice, is that just a factor of this is what happens when you see somebody 3 times in a week? It's going to start getting a little testy.
Nah, that was bad intent right there. That was some bad intent. It's so funny. Last night, 2 nights ago actually, I ran into Mike McCord, who's the equipment man for the Cowboys.
Legendary equipment man.
And Mike is the catch the snap guy for, he used to be the catch. We got so many coaches now, we don't have to have Mike do the catch the snap stuff anymore.
Right.
And so Mike was telling me about the time that I said, what's the hardest you've ever been hit? And he says, I got hit by John Nix one time, the defensive tackle who we gave the nickname the trash can full of dirt.
Yeah.
We gave John Nix hit him one time. He said the hard thing was you got to be careful when they go twist stunt, when they put, it's 2 versus 2s, 2 on 2, and you got guys falling around and guys penetrating that. He says you got to keep your head on the swivel for sure then. But Huggins, you can't do that. You can't, I was standing right there when he and Tank walked by, and Tank goes, "Are you okay?" like, bro, what are you doing? You okay? He says, "Yeah, they just kicked me out of practice." And so he's like, I guess so. Like, what are you doing, man? But yeah, that you don't need that. That's an unfortunate thing that happened in the practice.
I actually really like the way Mike McCarthy talked about it yesterday, where he said that when it happened, he went over because he was on the offensive side of the field. He didn't see this rep, and so he'd come over when he heard about it and had kind of apologized to Sean McVay, like, "Hey, sorry, that's not what our guys do." And McCarthy said he went home or got done with practice, went back to his room and watched the play and felt the need to call him again after he saw it to go, "Hey, I need to reiterate how sorry I am because that's not acceptable. Like, now that I've even seen it, that's not acceptable." And McVay, to his credit, told him, "You would have been proud of your coaches and the way they handled it because they were just as upset as we were about it," and telling him, "You need to get off the field."
Yeah, that's the way. Yeah, they
that's Jeff Skinny in general. That's the way that he's going to handle things.
Jeff is not going to take. Jeff is not. Jeff is I feel like Jeff just getting.
He's a pro.
Yeah, he's kind of a man of honor. There's a lot of honor being on the field with him. I'll say this though too. There was a lot of buzz when the Cowboys were making all these moves, adding bodies, and trading and doing this. There was a lot of talk of, well, we could probably see the end of Huggins here. There was a lot of that talk going on, and but he lives to fight another day, probably because they need these defensive tackles.
I mean, that's honestly what it comes down to. And
it really does. It really does.
And you mentioned the defensive tackle. So there was a trade this week. The Cowboys acquire Jordan Phillips from defensive tackle from the New York Giants. They signed Carl Lawson, who they had worked out and decided not to sign. Shaka Toney is on his way out, but they've also signed Cole Cabral this week. And offensive lineman who had been in the UFL most recently.
Guard. I got to play guard.
This comes after Earl Bostic had gotten hurt and Shumay Doga and everything else. Brian, I want to get your thoughts on. We've talked about Lawson, but your thoughts on the Jordan Phillips signing in a second. But if you could just lead off answering this question for me, or addressing this thought. The Cowboys since August 1st have acquired 8 players with NFL experience. Whether it be through free agency or trade or anything else. Is that responding to the war of attrition that occurs with injuries and everything else? Or does that strike you that there might be some concerns about what they're seeing with their depth and they're needing to find other guys?
I think that's it. I think that Will McClay and Alex Loomis, Henry Schroka, I think those guys I think they're looking at their roster and they're meeting with Mike and talking with him about personnel, meeting with the Joneses, talking about personnel. I don't think they want to get caught short like they did at linebacker last year. I don't think they want to. I've always believed this about training camp practices. You could get 2 weeks into it and kind of figure out where you effed up.
Yeah.
In the springtime. You could figure, you think, okay, we did this the right way. Now, they lose Sam Williams, and, they were chasing that a little bit. And, they feel like, going to get Carl Lawson, what I heard with Carl Lawson is his price came down, which allowed them to make this deal. So that's a positive right there in itself. But I think that Will and the pro scouts, they're looking at that team and they're saying we've got to be better here. And maybe you have, the coaches, maybe Will McClay asking Jeff Sagina or asking Mike Zimmer and saying, hey, how can I help you? What can I help you with? He goes, sometimes you get these coaches that Mike Zimmer is a, hey, bring me whoever you want guy and I'll coach him.
Yeah.
He's very big on that. Dan Quinn's was a little bit more hands-on with the players that he brought in. So kind of feeling like that maybe that Will got 2 weeks into this thing, 3 weeks into this thing and said, we're just not good enough here. We've got to figure some things out.
Yeah, a lot of additions on the defensive side of the ball too, and one of those 8 additions I mentioned, Shaka Toney, he's already gone. To be fair, but you're talking about you go get Al-Qadim Muhammad, Shaka Toney, Andrew Booth, Cole Cobble, Jordan Phillips, Carl Lawson, Nick Vigil, and Albert Huggins. It's a lot of movement. Normally we see one Anthony Barr or one Kavonte Turpin, one Brett Maher. A lot of them here is just a little bit surprising. Brian, quick, maybe minute-long thumbnail before we move on to this Raiders game. Give us your thoughts on the Jordan Phillips move.
Yeah, I talked to some folks with the Giants, believe it or not, just kind of circle back because I wanted to make sure.
I believe it because you talk to a lot of people. You know a lot of folks, Brian.
I do. I talked to some folks at the Giants, and I just wanted to know, hey, did this guy, was he a malcontent, bad guy? Was he causing problems and all that? Everything about it was positive. They've got a defensive tackle, Riley, that they drafted that they really, really like. And they've got a couple of their younger guys that they really, really like. And so this is one of those things where they said, well, maybe this guy's not going to make our team, and now we can find a way to maybe move on. Dallas has a need. Dallas was probably hunting some offensive lineman tackles, maybe Will getting on the phone, calling around the league and saying, hey, if you got any surplus at tackle, give us a shout. And, the Giants and, maybe the Giants were in a situation too, where they were like, this guy's not going to make our roster. But it was nothing negative about the player. Now, if you watch him at Buffalo, and there's a lot of positive watching that Buffalo tape. I do feel like he's a better pass rusher than what you had, with Hankins. I think he plays with range. I think he plays with power. I think the guy could get up the field. He got a sack. It was a great sack. I mean, if you're a Buffalo Bill fan against the Cowboys, he's lining up outside. Here's a 320-something pound man lining up outside of Tyron Smith, and they run a twist stunt, and he gets home. They don't block him. They don't pick him up. There were a couple times against Biotish where he attacked Biotish up the field, lined up on the left side, went across all the way to the right side. This guy is active with his movement and all that. I think he's got enough strength to hold up the double teams, things like he's just going to move. He's going to stay active, and he's going to give you some pass rush. There were a couple of times watching the Kansas City game where Mahomes had to throw it around him. This guy goes up and knocks balls away. He's very aware of how to play along the line of scrimmage if, in fact, he doesn't get penetration.
Yeah, he's somebody who definitely, you talk about the addition that you make right now in terms of he's one of your better defensive tackles on your roster instantly.
Yeah, this is what Gilmore and Cooks has the potential to be. This type of move has that type of potential.
You are listening to the Love the Star podcast, the Love the Stars and Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, we do have this game against the Raiders that's coming up, and I wanted to run through some of these names with you. I had made a list during the course of the week over at 105 through the fan of just the guys that I think have the most on the line heading into this game, the most pressure on them, or the most to either gain or lose, or not even necessarily bubble guys, but guys who have a lot on the line for them there. So I came up with 5 names for you. I want to kick them around really quick. Number 1 for me, and I know you said earlier you don't need him to pass the ball or anything else, but still I think regardless of what his participation level is, there's a lot on the line for Trey Lance in this game, because you're talking about barring injury to Dak Prescott, Trey Lance is likely not going to see the field much this season, which means given what happened in the last game, this is one of 2 opportunities left, not only to present something to Dallas. I mean, you've got practices here in Dallas, but this is your opportunity to put something on tape for other teams, potentially your next job, because you're a free agent after this year. And so you want to create some sort of level of confidence or some sort of flash that people can go back and look on that tape and say, all right, there it is. It was starting to click into place. So for me, Brian, I think you can make the argument there is not a player in the NFL who has more financially on the line based on this preseason and these preseason games than Trey Lance.
Yeah, I think, man, I'd have to rack my brain and go through all those, but I like what you're doing with the opportunity. I think Trey Lance right now is playing to see if he's either the second or the third quarterback this year.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I think he's at right now. And, yeah, every snap he takes is important. I don't need him, as I mentioned, throwing the ball 40 times. I like to see it have a little bit more balance. I'd like to see, him not miss some opportunities down in the red zone or the tight red zone with some of the throws. I'd like to see him put some points up on the board. I'm all about Aubrey kicking field goals, but I don't need I don't need 9 of them or whatever. I don't, I'm being facetious there, but
I get what you're saying though.
You know what I mean? I mean, I when you get down in the red zone and, make a read and make the right throw. Don't panic and throw it into some place where you shouldn't be throwing it. And so I do believe that he is playing right now to see if he's either the second or third quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And if he ends up being the second, he has potentially to be the quarterback of the future if, in fact, Dak Prescott does not sign back here. I mean, he'll be a free agent himself, but maybe the Cowboys will say, listen, we think enough of Trey Lance that we'll offer him a type of deal that we can make him the starter. That's if something does happen to Dak where he moves on.
What specific scenarios you talked about, like you want to see him get better in the red zone where the field kind of tightens up? What are some situations you would like to see him find himself in this game?
Yeah.
Would you like to see multiple snaps of 3rd and long? Like, would you like to see how he does on 3rd and long snaps? Or would you like to see him do, what kind of situations are you looking for?
I believe he was 2 of 8 last week in the red zone for 10 yards. You can't function like that. I want to see him, if you get down near the red zone and all of a sudden they call a play where they send the tight end on the wheel and then back to the flat, and all of a sudden you have a touchdown opportunity up atop and you don't even look that direction when you had exactly what you wanted out of that play call. Those are the things I need to see. I need to see when there's a guy running up the seam that all of a sudden he sees that guy and throws the ball there and it's a big play. That's what I need to see. I don't need to see him throw the ball inside a coverage where a guy is having to make a contested play, especially with the receivers. If, the secondary makes a mistake or the linebackers don't cover a guy, and now all of a sudden there's a guy, a little anticipation that way as far as I want to see him do that. I don't want to see him be 2 of 8 down in the red zone. I just don't think that's winning football.
Next name on this list for out of the 5 that I had, these are the guys that I think have the most on the line in Saturday's game. Number 2 is Eric Scott Jr. He struggled in the opening preseason game, and we've talked about it. His sponsor is no longer in the building. Dan Quinn has left for Washington. I do think this acquisition of Andrew Booth also is going to put more pressure on Scott naturally, not because they necessarily think Booth is a better player or anything else, but it's a new name. It's somebody that you don't know competitively what you have in that room, and somebody they're going to want to get a look at, and somebody who's a former 2nd-round pick. If he flashes, that matters. And we've said this before when talking about Willie Harvey or some of the guys that they've signed. It's important to remember anybody that they acquire from spring on, when you're talking about in a competitive room, the distinction needs to be remembered that this is somebody approved by Mike Zimmer, and the other person, he may like him, but it wasn't somebody approved by Mike Zimmer. So Eric Scott, for instance, did not get a seal of approval from Mike Zimmer, but Andrew Booth probably got some level of, yes, I can work with this guy. And so, Brian, I think Eric Scott has a lot riding on this game as well.
I actually think there's more pressure on Booth than there is Scott. And I want to say maybe they've moved on from Scott. That maybe that, they're like, okay, well.
You think his fate might already be sealed?
I think that unless something drastically changes, I think that might be the case. We'll see. Maybe that's a practice squad situation, but a roster spot. The thing about Booth, and you kind of talk to people in Minnesota about him a little bit, they felt like that he lost his confidence as a player. and he's a good-looking player. There's no question about that. Seeing him live out here, but you got to be able to play with instincts. And they felt like that maybe that he lost that. He struggled a little bit in press coverage for him, and he just wasn't good enough in off coverage. And that was one of his calling cards, was his ability to play off coverage. When you looked at Clemson and you looked at Minnesota, I kind of felt like the off coverage stuff were his ability to drive on the ball and do those things. So it's he didn't play a lot of special team stuff too and maybe this is where the Vikings, they make the deal. They get Wright, who has had his own share of struggles, but probably a little bit better special teams player. The Vikings have been just not very good at cornerback. They've struggled in talking to several of their people up there, they've struggled with that. And I was kind of talking about Wright and what I thought, but this is like a player for player swap that both teams are getting guys that have kind of, they have faults. They have things that they need work on, and if they can overcome those tendencies or those faults, then maybe that you can find a player. I think there's a lot of pressure on Andrew Booth. I really do, because I think it's on him in a way of like, are you better than, and maybe it's not even about Eric Scott anymore. Maybe it's are you better than someone else? I mean, this could very well be for, this very well could be for that fifth or sixth spot when we start to talk about this with the building of the roster.
Number 3 on my list, and this isn't ranked in order, just the third name, Cooper Beebe. Beebe's been given the opportunity to truly compete at center this week, like we mentioned. He's continued to have some rough snaps at practice. I know I saw there was a center exchange with Dak on Wednesday that didn't go so smoothly. That needs to get better in live game action if he wants to kind of pull off this upset with Brock Hoffman. And also I think it's important knowing that you're trying to get these reps in. You're trying to win this battle right here, working with a number of these snaps with a mobile quarterback, which actually has a tendency, it sounds counterintuitive to a lot of kids, working with a mobile quarterback tends to almost frustrate offensive linemen more. Like they feel like they actually
don't know where they are.
Exactly. It's like they know a quarterback in the pocket who, like, those steps matter of, hey, I know he's going to be back here. I got to get the guy upfield. But I mean, you could be in a situation where you feel like you've done your job, and then you look over and go, oh, he just ran into the guy that I was trying to push out of the way.
Right.
Because he's kind of moving around a little bit.
Yeah, you don't know where to set. Sometimes they run into sacks. You think you keep a guy wide, and now you're running into a sack. But that's that the mobile quarterback is a blessing and a curse all in itself.
So does BB to me is one who, as he's kind of making this progression, if he wants to win this job, these are going to be this game's going to be important.
Yeah, because we all kind of thought that when McCarthy stood up there and told us he's going to get more work at ones, we kind of thought that was the end of Brock Hoffman. But then we practiced yesterday, and Brock Hoffman's running with the ones again. So there's going to be a legitimate competition here between the two. I didn't feel like that Hoffman played terribly in the game the other day. I mean, I felt like there were a couple of busts and a couple of blocks that he had that weren't good. Kind of felt the same thing about Cooper Beebe, So I just know that there's more power with Cooper Beebe and the potential of more second-level blocks. I think that's the thing that really sets him apart from Hoffman, is that he's able to get to the second level, and I'm not sure that Hoffman's always able to do that.
Is there a case to be made potentially that, because obviously the snaps are going to be on Hoffman's side. He's had more experience doing that recently. It's newer to him. But when you talk about the power and the getting to the second level, and that's all good stuff right there in BB's favor in a lot of ways, is there an argument to be made internally if they're looking at this where they say, all right, so if we're talking about playing guard, yeah, BB would be ahead in this one, but we're talking about center where we need this guy to be kind of the quarterback of the offensive line, and Hoffman is somebody who gets a lot of high marks for the IQ, the mental processing, the pre-snap diagnosis.
The experience is the only thing he's got on BB right now.
Yeah.
That's I mean, BB's able to identify. I haven't seen anything. There was the one snap in the game where he saw a twist stunt late, And the more you play, the more you will understand the old head on the swivel bit, because it's like you're looking, you got to be able to have that peripheral vision to be able to see, okay, twist is coming from my right. They're double twisting here. Okay. Oh, this is first threat. I got to be over here. He was just a little late reading, but that's really just what experience will do for you, or lack of. If you don't have the experience, then you might struggle with some of those reads. But I tell you what, I mean, he's done a fine job in a lot of ways. The snaps have gotten a lot better. Now, there'll be some snaps in that one-on-one period where he'll snap it like pretty high, but like in the team periods, it's been pretty spot on.
Next name on this list, Willie Harvey. So Willie Harvey was a bubble guy coming into camp, and I think he's been pretty consistent, pretty impressive. I know you've liked what you've seen from him. Nick Eatman from DallasCowboys.com mentioned him. He's been pretty consistently picked to be on the 53 by most people. Sunday's game was not great. He had a viral moment where he just, he fell for the eye candy, and he followed something. He didn't remain gap disciplined. It wasn't good. And he can't afford to develop a reputation as the guy who can't take his practices into games.
A guesser. Don't be a guesser.
Yeah, and I think that this is a big game to, hey, show that was a one-off, or show that it was a bad moment. Show you can carry these practices into games.
Yeah, and I'll say this. Maris Leofau needs the same work, too. He needs to have, not that he's going anywhere, but he and Harvey both played a little bit of guessing games in that, they were not as locked in. And I mean locked in of like assignments, and, don't guess on the guy that I think is starting to play himself into some contention is Nick Vigil. Mm-hmm. I think he's starting to play himself into a reliable linebacker in coverage, a guy that kind of can play the run. He's not going to be really super athletic or anything like that, but he plays in coverage. He plays the run. He can play on special teams. He made a nice pass defense in the Rams. They tried to throw the ball in the flat. He drove over there and knocked the ball down. And so, if Willie Harvey doesn't step his game up, this Nick Vigil who they got could be a guy that kind of takes that spot, just being a veteran guy and a little bit more consistent.
A veteran guy, a guy who, when you look at the Cowboys roster right now, I believe other than Eric Kendricks, I believe he is the guy who has started the most NFL games at linebacker on the roster. Yep. He's started 53 games, and it's important to remember, not only did they pick him and work him out and bring him in here, this is a Paul Gunther guy, and right. That's somebody who's got experience with him. So something to know. But I think this is a big game for Willie Harvey.
Well liked. Harvey, yeah. You're right about Harvey, and I'll throw all those linebackers in there. I mean, they need to.
Damian Wilson, Vigil.
Yes. Buddy Johnson. Yes, all those guys are need to step up, and for the most part, some of them have practiced very well, but we'll see on the games how that works out.
All right, and then the last name I had in here, Jalen Cropper, and Cropper's made a strong push at wide receiver in the last 10 to 14 days. It was all about Tyron Billy Johnson and Racey McMath in the first week of camp. But Cropper has seemingly kind of surpassed them as the receiver with the best chance to try and push and make the roster. So I think for me, he played well, I thought, in the game last week. He's had good practices. And if you're looking for what's the path that he can follow here, the Jalen Cropper path can look similar to the Dennis Houston path that got Dennis Houston on the roster a couple years ago. If he continues to show up in these practices, he's doing his job the right way. He's then taking the practice and showing the same consistency in games. That's what got Dennis Houston on the roster when nobody had him in here initially. Yeah. And so I think that Cropper can follow that a little bit. And he was here last year as a practice squad guy, and a guy that I know there are people with the Cowboys who think this is somebody who can absolutely be, even if it's not here, this is somebody who can hang on a 53-man roster in the NFL.
Yeah, there's the wide receiver room might become a little bit of a surplus room, like the safety room has become a little bit of surplus. There's probably some guys that are battling for 5th, 6th, 7th spots here that could probably be a 4 on somebody else's team right now. Bobby, you mentioned it, Cropper as one guy. I'm going to take 4 guys and make him 1. How about that?
Do it.
Cropper's in that list for sure. Billy Johnson is another one in that list. Ryan Flournoy is in that list as well. And I think that David Durden, who you've tried to convince me was going to make the team last year until he got hurt. But I think those 4 guys right there, you might be playing for 1 spot, or you might be 4 guys playing for 2 spots. But those are 4 names that need to be now. The Racy McMath the other day, it's unfortunate he's made some plays in practice, but he dropped the ball a couple of different times there.
Yeah, big back-to-back
Kelvin
plays.
Harmon has done absolutely nothing at practice, and then he shows up in the game. I don't know. He might be what we always talk about, the gamer guy. Well, he might be that guy. But I do believe that Billy Johnson, Cropper, Flournoy, and Durden are battling for spots. Those 4 guys, I think, if you mention 1 guy, I think I'm going to take 4 guys and make him 1, and all those guys need to have a really a good game.
You are listening to the Love the Star podcast. The Love the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, it is now time for our Dean Julia Love the Star mailbag. This is where we turn things over to our dear sweet listeners, get their thoughts, their comments, their questions, talk about the things that they would like to talk about. So let's kick off here with first question here from DJ. He says, how is Terrence Steele doing? I haven't heard anyone talk about him. Brian, how has he looked in these practices? Is he returning to form at all? What have your thoughts been?
Yeah, the health is better. The movement's better. There's still things that Terrence Steele is going to struggle with. He is not a powerful player. He is one of those guys where at times he will get too tall and they will get under him and they will walk him.
Yeah.
And when they walk him, he'll struggle to reset his feet and reset his hands. When he can set his hands, set his feet, he's generally a pretty good pass blocker. There's things athletically he could do in the running game. Him and Martin can work together. They've had before the injury. I think that last year was unfortunate for him because he was coming back from injury, and I think that robbed him of some of his movement skills. Movement skills are back, but there's still those moments where he could be really, really good, 2 or 3 reps on his set, really good in the run game, and then completely just get run by, whether that's Parsons or anybody on the tank, anybody on the edge. Those guys, he tends to, when guys break him down, is when he struggles the most, and we've seen that occasionally here in practice, and some of the work against the Rams as well.
Brian, next question here from Tex Mayo. In your gut, who makes it as the 3rd tight end on this team?
Well, it's probably going to be Schoonmaker. I have a feeling we'll see.
So who's the 2nd?
Stevens.
Okay.
So I think you got Ferguson, Stevens, Schoonmaker would be. Schoonmaker, I think, is bad. I think Stevens is going to be on this team. I don't think he's been as great as he was last year, but that's working through things. But he is a good-looking player. But I don't think they're going to do anything with Schoonmaker. It would be surprising to me if they moved on for him after 1 year. This tight end group, they seem like, remember with Dalton Schultz and other, was it 2-3 years?
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, they've got guy who was pretty decent. So
Schultz, Blake Jarwin, Martellus Bennett didn't click till he left. It happens.
They've had them all. So to me, I kind of feel like that Schoonmaker, he needs to start making some plays. I mean, they threw him the ball the other day and went right through his hands. He's capable of catching the football and getting up the field. But my gut feeling right now, I would say they're going to protect the draft for 1 more year, and it would be Schoonmaker.
If I came out, if you were brand new, say you were dropped into Dallas, you had never covered this football team, you knew nothing about their roster building, nothing about their players, and I said after 3 weeks that you've been out there, said, Brian Broaddus, rank the top 3 tight ends you've seen for me, seen out here. What would be the 3 names you'd say?
I would probably say Ferguson. Then I would say Stevens. Spanford has got my attention a little bit, but him, Fant, Hendershot. It's not as much. I think that if I had to, I think they really do like Fant a lot, but Span Ford seems like a guy when you start to talk about NFL third tight ends, kind of the big blocker type guys. I kind of feel like that would be the guy that I would pick third. So I would go, as I said, Ferguson, Stevens, Span Ford, Fant, Schoonmaker.
We'll see if Fant makes this roster.
I don't think he will, but
I'll say this.
He ran a really good route the other day. It should have been a touchdown.
If Hunter Lipke wasn't on this roster, I would feel certain that Fant would be, because they would have him as an H-back. That's kind of the role that they would have him play. Next question here from, let's go with at the Z Fox. He says, who are the cornerstones of this current team versus who are the cornerstones in 3 years? So I guess we'll just say it this way. Which guys who are cornerstones of this roster right now do you think are not going to be here in 3 years?
Do you think the quarterback's going to be here?
I don't feel confident enough to say yes.
I don't feel confident either. Zach Martin going to be here?
No.
Tank Lawrence going to be here?
No.
Okay, they're your three cornerstone type guys, right?
And one of Deron Bland or Trayvon Diggs, I don't think will be here.
Yeah, I think they'll let. Man, that's tough.
Do they let Bland walk, or do they just move? Do they decide to pay Bland and move Diggs?
Man, I love Bland.
I like both players. It's just it's really hard to keep both of them.
Can you keep the corner if you don't sign the quarterback? Do you take
what quarterback? What quarterback are you replacing him with? How much are you sinking into there? Like that? That's where that all comes in.
I'm spending $20 million on a quarterback.
Yeah.
See, the thing about it is, Dak was going to cost you 40 and dead. I'm going to spend 60. I'm going to spend 60 whether I sign him or don't have him, because 40 is going to go dead, and you're going to have to spend another 20 on another quarterback, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, so minimum probably.
You're going to spend $60 million right there. Am I right about that? Did my math work out there?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like that if you don't sign the quarterback, you're going to think about Parsons, what you got to do with him. But man, I would hate to see them let Bland walk. I really would. And there's a side of me that believes that maybe because of what happened with Diggs, but man, he's made some plays. I don't know. That's good.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd like to believe they could figure out a way to get both these corners done.
And when we talk about guys who are not cornerstones now, but maybe in 3 years, obviously we don't know who they're going to acquire, but guys who just project out. First guys that come to mind for me are Guyton and Tyler Smith, which Tyler Smith you could argue is already there.
Tyler Smith, cornerstone. Parsons probably cornerstone.
I think he is one now.
Yeah. Right now he is. And
Guyton developing into one, potentially Ferguson does.
Lamb?
Yeah, I think Lamb is now. And I think he's here in 3 years, I would hope. Anyway, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see where that one goes. All right, Brian.
Good question, though. Good question.
It is. Let's wrap up with this question from, let's go with this one from Matt. He says, Dallas went 0-5 last season in regular season games where Brandon Cook went under 20 receiving yards. Almost all of these games, Miami, Buffalo, San Francisco, Philly, were against playoff opponents. What scheme changes can the Cowboys make on offense to get Cooks more involved against better teams?
To me, the vertical stuff is always really, really good because of his ability to just run by people.
And it just wasn't there consistently. They weren't calling it enough last year.
He was asked to do, especially late in the year, he was asked to do things that Gallup was doing, the slants and the things like that. That's not his cup of tea. What you need to do with Cooks is you got to find a way to get him vertical. You got to find a way to run like arrow routes where he starts on one side of the formation and runs right through the secondary, through the linebackers, through the secondary, across the safeties from one side to the other. He's anything to do where he's going vertically is going to be a good play for him. We saw him against the Rams in the practice. He was running some deep in cuts. I don't know if that's, but he found space between two safeties, and Dak stepped up and found him 2 different times. I just think that scheme-wise, he was the one guy when they were doing goal line period against the Rams where the offense wasn't great, but he was good down on the goal line running around because he finds space and he knows how to get himself open.
He gets open fast. That's
what you got to do. You got to throw combinations, or you got to try to run plays that allows him to use his speed and his quickness to win immediately and then get him the ball. And I'm not talking about screens and stuff like that. I'm talking about let him run on people, out routes, comebacks, things like that along the sidelines where, he could use his speed. He could drive the defender back, turn him, and then break back to the ball. Those are the kinds of things I think you need to do with him.
I lied. There's one more question because I just saw it pop in, and I know these are your favorites. Last one, Brian, I promise. John Snelson here, because these are the type of questions you like, I feel like. He says, where do you think Dak would go if the offers he had on the table were Dallas for $62 million, Minnesota for $62 million, Pittsburgh for $64 million, Las Vegas Raiders for $70 million?
There's a side of me that believes. Let's think. Raiders, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. Minnesota's got their quarterback, though, right, of the future. Don't they get J.J. McCarthy? So I'm going to eliminate them.
Let's call that Tampa instead.
Okay. Tampa for 62.
Mm-hmm.
Give me Tampa for 62 over the Raiders for 70.
I think I would say this. If it's Tampa for 62, I think Dallas finishes 3rd or 4th on this list of options.
Yeah.
That just kind of says where it is right now.
Yep.
All right, that does it for us here today on the Love the Star podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back with more episodes coming up here shortly. I'll be at the station tomorrow talking to Brian Broaddus remotely for pre and post game show on the Dallas Cowboys Radio Network.
Well, when you tape this, we're taping Friday, so
it'll be actually
today. Yes, Bobby will be on with me today.
Today, pre and post game, hanging out, and we'll have a Cowboys reaction for you. We'll have a clip of that post game show that you guys will hear, and then we'll do a follow up episode after that. And remember, head over to chillboys.com, use promo code STAR for 15% off your order. Thank you so much to Chill Boys. We appreciate them very much. That's how you can support us because they support us in a big way, and that's how you can support the podcast. For Brian Broaddus, I'm Bobby Belt. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys later. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest updates. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.